everyone out there. Welcome to Radio OPAC. I'm Jessie Glover, and I am thrilled to be in conversation today with Heidi Arnold. Hello, Heidi.
Hi.
Hi, welcome to all of you out there. Radio OPAC is a weekly conversation series centered around the intersection between the arts and the justice system. It is our way of bringing people together, even in a time where we are pretty often far apart. We're a part of Ohio Prison Arts Connection, a network of people around the state who are committed to promoting arts access and arts contact for people who are impacted by the justice system. And today we're talking with Heidi Arnold, who is a faculty member at Sinclair Community College and who has just written an anthology called Belly Full of Stones, which is a collection of writings from women who have experienced incarceration, along with her own writings. And so we're going to talk about Belly Full of Stones today. Heidi, thank you so much for being here with
Thank you.
Yes, so if we could start by just hearing a little bit about your story. How did you find yourself, first of all, teaching in the prison context, and second, coming up with the idea to put together a book?
Yeah, it's a long story, but the short version is I was living in North Carolina across the street, across the road from a great neighbor. And he ended up in prison for 9 years. And I was very shocked. I was very devoted to him. But before that moment, I had very harsh views about people in prison, about what they should have, what they shouldn't have. And as soon as I had this friend land in prison, my paradigm totally shifted.
Wow.
And I had a different heart about it. I went to visit him. I was connected to him the entire years that he was there, even when he moved away. And I think that's what really softened my heart for that. And then when I came to Sinclair College here in Ohio to teach, I knew that we had someone teaching in the prison here. And eventually that person left the position, and I said, I want to step into that space. So
Wow.
that got me there in the first place. And I teach interpersonal communication. So it's just part of the scene to understand a person, to talk about your feelings, to talk about how you communicate with other people. And I ended up, I build relationships with my students no matter where I am. And so I began to observe, and I would go home at the end of a day and I would write down very interesting things that I was learning just about prison, about jargon, about lingo. It was like walking into a foreign country to me. And what are the new foods and what are the new cultural things?
Wow.
And so I started writing. I do some poetry and some nonfiction. So I was just writing things for several years. And eventually, I don't know what year it was, I said, this has got to be compiled into a book. And what I really wanted to do was let the voice of the students, of the women who are incarcerated, to be heard. And I have been telling them, I'm writing this. And of course, I started connecting to the women who were on the outside, who had been released, and started to gather their stories. And I just said, tell me, what is it you want to talk about?
Yeah.
So we collaborated in that way.
So this came out of some paradigm shifts, it sounds like, for you. Some
Yes.
that were unexpected, right? You didn't expect to have this personal encounter with someone who became justice involved, and then sort of an unfolding set of realizations over time as you put yourself in the classroom and develop relationships and community with the people that you were educating.
And one of the things that I reflected on in this process was, why is this so enjoyable to me? Why am I doing this? And it took me a year of really thinking about it and dreaming about it to realize that it stems from my upbringing with my dad. My dad raised my brother and I as a single man in the 70s, and he ran a business. And I just recently wrote a blog about how it impacted me. And I had no idea until recently that his reaching out to customers and clients of his business, I saw him reaching out to people in need and people less than, people in minority groups, people who were in these, you know, places of, you know, people putting them down and not seeing them, places of invisibility.
Wow.
And I realized it's really about my upbringing, and I had no idea.
And you started telling that story because you were trying to understand why this gave you joy.
Yes.
So is the joy coming from just something that is rooted deep within you, or part of your DNA, part of the legacy of your dad, or is that the totality of it? Is there something else that is something about the experience of teaching? Or
I think it's all things, you
yeah.
know, certainly about my DNA. It's certainly about the joy I feel in teaching, but there is something special about walking into a prison and being a teacher, something different than what I do on an everyday basis in my classroom at my school. I think it has to do with um, the fact that they feel more human
Mm.
when we're together. They feel more seen when we're together. I talk to them like a normal person. I call them by their name. And I love the fact that they love to be there and they love to learn. And they, you know, my students regularly love to learn, but these women are different. You know, they're hungry for something different. And I'm so happy to provide that something different.
So it was out of your own reflections and out of your discovery of this classroom space where there was such a love and such a hunger that you imagined this book project.
I
So I'd
did.
love to hear some of the stories and experiences you had in sort of envisioning it yourself and then imagining together alongside some of your
Mhm.
current and former students what would actually be the content of the book. So tell me about that experience of actually putting the book together alongside others.
Yeah. Um, there was a lot of thinking that went into that. And I did have some collaboration from women on the inside that I would talk to on our breaks or maybe as we were walking out of the room.
Mm.
What do you think about this? Some who like to write or like to read. And so there was some collaboration with them about how should I set it up and how many stories should there be? Should there be poetry? Should it just be me talking? Should it be, you know, the women's voices? And they gave me great advice along the way, and it changed, you know, and certainly, you know, morphed along the way. I will say that one of the, I don't know if it's a critical piece, but in my mind, it's a critical piece, is a woman I met named Billy Joe, and I dedicate the book to Billy Joe, who has since died. I believe she was incarcerated innocently. I don't think she was guilty. And she never spoke to me about that really. I mean, she didn't, you know, she wasn't talking about that, but I felt it. And she ended up becoming sick while she was incarcerated. And she was able to be released just a couple of months before she died. And I was able to see her and um, told her that she would not be forgotten, you know, because she had been locked away for 10 years. And again, I think unnecessarily. Um, and I went to the funeral and listened to her friends talk and her family. I learned a lot about her just sitting and observing, but I promised her that she would not be forgotten. And of course, her bit of her story is in the book. And that was so meaningful to me to think that I had a little bit more of a purpose, a little bit more of a focus to begin the book. There's also a woman who was writing poetry while she was incarcerated, a spoken word artist. And she just kept feeding me poetry and feeding me and prompting me, you know, and saying, you can do it. It's amazing to me how many of these women were cheering me on. Here I was thinking I was cheering them on when in fact it was very reciprocal. There have been a couple of women that I've collaborated with, and I say that they allow me in. They allow me to hear their story. They tell me the truth. I never feel lied to by them. And one in particular has been in and out of prison, in and out. And every time she's out, see each other. And when she's in, she feels shame and sorrow for being there. She says to me, "Oh, I'm so ashamed." But she has always allowed me to hear the truth and to hear what's going on in her life. And it's allowed me to write a lot about her story, but also understanding what other people are going through. So, there's a lot of that. I did meet with some of them in person when I could. I traveled miles and miles to meet some of them just for, an hour or so. They take me in their home. They're not afraid to have me in or to have dinner with me. Some of them, most of them just submitted their story to me via email or texting. Technology is a little bit of an issue. They don't all have computers or access to those sorts of things. The timing was a little bit challenging. I thought I would have it all completed by a certain time, and then I was waiting for them to turn in stories, and then a whole bunch would come at once, and I'm like, oh, well, I'll just wait for a few more. Anyway, it's been great to visit with them after their release and to get to know them in a different way.
That's amazing. I'm really touched by hearing all of the very personal and relational components of this, the ways in which the women you've worked with are really open with their own stories and personal experiences, the ways that they're excited to have their voices amplified, and the ways that they saw themselves as your support system.
They do. Yes.
So if
Yes.
you're just joining us, this is Radio OPAC. Welcome. We're glad you're here. I'm Jessie Glover, and I'm here with Heidi Arnold, who, in addition to being a faculty member at Sinclair Community College, is a recent author, has just published this year an anthology of her own writing and some of the writing of her formerly incarcerated students, called Belly Full of Stones. And we're talking about the process and the product today. So Heidi, this book just came out this year. It has found a readership, and I'd love to hear some of what you've heard back from people who have gotten the book in their hands and read these words.
Well, certainly the first people to read it were my friends, and I got lots of great feedback from my friends about how proud they were of me, and even a lot about that I was brave, which shocked me because it doesn't feel like bravery to me. It just feels like everyday life to me. But what has really impacted me the most is the response from the women who participated in the book, contributed to the book, and they are so proud of me, for one thing, and they're so proud to have their name in a book. And so they'll take a picture of themselves with the book and post it on Facebook, and just to be seen, to be visible, because for so long they haven't been seen, they haven't been heard. And just this little tiny snippet of their voice gets to be out there. And I think, as I said to you before, people on the outside consider prison to be a taboo topic, and they want to sweep it under the rug. So I interacted with a woman on the inside who, by strange conversation, I found out I knew her grandmother years ago. And when this woman was incarcerated, this young woman, I was around this grandmother. I never heard that she had a granddaughter who went to prison. So it's very much hush hush and swept under the rug. And these women are not hush hush. They are willing to be visible. They're willing to be honest and to tell the whole truth, which I love. The other thing that's really impacted me are the people who have no connection, as far as I know, to incarceration. And for instance, one woman sent me a text a few Sundays ago, and she said, "It's a beautiful Sunday morning, and I'm reading this book." And she said, "I cannot stop reading." And I've had several people say, "I need to read one vignette at a time. I want to just let it soak in. I want to process what it means. I want to give honor and, to the student, to the person, to the woman who wrote it, and really sit on it and not just speed right through it."
Wow. That's amazing. I'm thinking as I'm listening to you about the ways that we outside of prison sometimes see prison as a taboo, something that we can't talk about or can't touch. But as you've shared, your experience of working in the prison context started by having this surprise encounter with someone affected by the justice system, and it's really close to all of us. And it's our prison system. It's
Mhm.
not far away. It's right here. And in some ways, what I'm hearing in the reactions of people who've read the book is that it's sort of drawing close to them and coming, I guess, into their heart a little bit.
Mhm. I haven't done the research, but I would guess as well that every single person on this planet has some connection to someone incarcerated, whether it's a neighbor, a friend, a family member, a daughter, a sister, a grandmother, and we're just not talking about it.
Right, right. And this is this very personal journey that you've gone on, and that you have taken this opportunity, this platform to lift up the stories of people who are directly impacted by that system and living as formerly incarcerated people. So
Yes,
we can get our hands on this book, right?
you can.
How do we get our hands on this book?
So if you go to Amazon, I self-published this book.
Hmm.
It's a pretty easy process, and I just wanted it out there. I want people to know the stories. It's not about making money, it's about getting the message out.
Great.
And if you go to Amazon and type in Heidi Arnold, it'll pop right up. And
Excellent.
it's $15 on Amazon. Of course, Amazon takes a chunk of that, and I don't really care. I just want people to read it. So if people want to buy one and pass it around to 10 of their friends, that's great.
That's amazing. So you can get the book. We'll post the link, the direct link to the Amazon page for Belly Full of Stones in the comments. And we've also posted a link to a talkback, which will immediately follow this conversation. If you just click on the link, it's very easy. You can join a Zoom room where Heidi will be, where I will be, and a bunch of others who want to just have a little bit of a looser conversation about Belly Full of Stones. So we're going to close by hearing a little bit from the book. This is our moment of reflection. We like to end Radio OPAC with an experience of art that we share together and that can carry us out of this conversation into our days. And so, Heidi, you're going to share two excerpts from Belly Full of Stones.
Sure. So
Tell
the
us what we're going to start with.
is called Desperate for Color, and this was based on, it's something I wrote about a student. Her name is Katie, and she was an artist. That's all she wanted to do was art. She was in my class, and she was very disgruntled by lots of things and uneasy, and then she didn't show up.
Mm.
And I learned that she had gone to solitary confinement. And so after she returned to class and I found that out, I wrote this very short piece called Desperate for Color. She's an artist. You can tell by her edgy haircut, her imaginative smile, and the bright colored tattoo on her neck. The piercing in her cheek says she's unafraid to express, and she won't regret it when she does. Forgive her. No woman true to the craft would parade in a threadbare uniform with untied suntan-colored work boots that shuffle with a thud. But it's the only way she can express herself in a place where count, chow, and class are mandatory. Her elastic waist pants are emblazoned with her last name in a thick marker down the side of her thigh, and they hang like a dude holding his belt down low when he crosses the street. Van Gogh's canvas was much more than ballpoint pen and a stolen marker. So she slashes her arm, just enough to let the colors seep through. Urged by a muted blade, she sees reds, dried browns, and scarlet in the blood drips. Because she sketched out those colors, she must bear the burden of 7 similar days. In a square cell without textures other than rough, in a space without hues to occupy her eyes, in sight of the concrete blocks and not the 4 trees that are outside, in sight of white-shirted officers with chaos as her focal point. She's been up all night, watched by eyes who are paid to look, watched by those who don't understand that her Picasso dried mid-flow just in time for this gallery showing behind bars and glass. They think she's dying, but she's really desperate to live.
Thank you. And now we're going to hear a second section from a little bit later in the book. This piece is called Reptile.
Yes, so this is the piece that I wrote that pushed me to write the title for the book. She awaits judgment, and the first stone is forced. Her mouth is propped open, and swallowing is slow. It's painful and embarrassing to be open-mouthed and vulnerable in front of family and friends, and worse, enemies. The rock rests in her gut, right where she can feel it. Day and night, she senses it, sitting heavy. Her truth is misshapen, and its sharp, sharp edges slash her toughening skin. She keeps a straight face while more rocks are served for meals, followed by words she never meant to say, words never meant to destroy her living. Now she's placed in the water, barely recognizable, rarely seen, floating with the undercurrent. Her eyes stare forward while the scars form on her hidden soft spots. Her blood, teeming with movement, is slowing, cooling a bit every day. Rippling in the murky green river, she sees her reflection, but she doesn't know herself. She used to laugh and smile and carry no dread, but the predators now surround her. Big cats, leopards, jaguars. She submerges to avoid the pain, the insults, and the allegation. Every day, a rock, a pebble, a stone help her to digest the smirking and the loneliness. Stacked in her gut, just waiting to grind the ache for home and the throb for affection. Stones sleep at the very core of her knowing. That knowing is the only one who sees the truth. Years in the nighttime waters callous her sadness and turn her insides cold. Immovable eyes see only the enemy and the next stone to swallow. Her skin is thick with scales, camouflaging rage with calm. Years of ingesting stones and appearing extinct, she sinks lower into herself. Her swamp is infested with bitterness and shame, and the grit keeps her from rising. Fixing her gaze on nothing, she is now the predator, the armored hunter who owns the lake. A strong temptation to devour the innocent and the frightened rests on her tongue, just in case her jaws slam shut and swallow whole. Still, so very still, still, submerged by a bellyful of stones.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for that.
Thank you.
That textured writing, that descriptive, emotional writing. And thank you for sharing with us today about this book that you've created to transmit your experience and also the experiences of women who are directly impacted by the justice system.
Yes.
And thanks to all of you out there who have joined us today for this conversation. Again, I hope that you will click the link in the comments and join us for the talk back to hear a little bit more about and from Heidi today. Just click the link and you'll be directed to a Zoom call where we'll all be meeting to ask more questions. And I also hope you'll mark your calendar for next week. We'll be speaking on Radio OPAC with Larry Smith, who is the founder of the 6-Word Memoirs Initiative. We'll be talking about the ways that 6-Word Memoirs has had an impact on prison writing programs and other writing programs in carceral settings. So thank you again, Heidi, so much for being
Thank you.
with me today. And thank you all for joining us for Radio OPAC.